Okay, guys, no dread and gloom today, just brightness and rainbows. The sanctions against Russia are going to end. Several significant developments occurred this week, all of which revolved around the Saudi Arabia summit. U.S. President Donald Trump also referred to Zelensky as a tyrant, demonstrating America's lack of interest in pursuing the battle. Bankrolling Ukraine is soon to come to an end, and Europe will bear the weight. We knew this would be the consequence. The fight is simply too costly for the U.S. They've spent over $150 billion, and it's time to get out of Dodge. So we have to talk about the coming removal of U.S. economic sanctions against Russia. Because make no mistake, the EU can stand tall and continue to impose fines. But will they be effective? Europe has imposed its 16th round of sanctions on Putin's economy. They will prohibit aluminum imports. But who will it harm? China and Asia will gladly purchase the increased supplies at a bargain. The EU will suffer the most as a result of the loss of inexpensive Russian commodities. The same applies for their further restrictions on Russian warships. But how do you approve a shadow fleet? From the oil price ceiling to shutting Russia off from SWIFT, nothing has been done to stop the war machine. Money is still coming into the war chest. Russian GDP rose by 4% last year, and we forecast about 3% growth over the following 4 years until 2027. And based on their budget income, we can tell that the economy is becoming increasingly diverse. Since 2022, income has increased by at least 30%. Oil income has not plummeted, and more funds are flowing from other industries. It's no surprise that the U.S. is using the opportunity to shift away from its failing policy. Insanity is defined as doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results. To put it frankly, Russia has outlasted the collective West's sanctions. And whether you like Putin or not, he has kept the Russian economy running, and he remains in power. The same cannot be true of many Western politicians, including Biden and Rishi Sunak. The United States has formally indicated that removing sanctions on Russia will be part of the negotiations. What's hilarious is how the U.S. would arm-twist Europe into lifting the sanctions on Russia, since presumably the ultimate objective is to achieve enduring peace. So Europe will come to the negotiation table kicking and screaming. But let's speak about how the sanctions affect China, the EU, and the United States. What is predicted to happen, and how will the main powers react? First and foremost, recognize that the lifting of sanctions on Russia does not signify the end of the situation. The goal of limiting China's economy remains unchanged. What we are seeing now is America's strategic shift from Europe to Asia. The Treasury Secretary is advising China to rebalance its economy, reduce exports, and shift more toward a consumption-based market system. Furthermore, he refers to the Chinese yuan as cheap, implying that Beijing should strengthen the RMB. So the conflict between the United States and China is entirely about exports. The United States aims to expand its worldwide presence and sell more to the globe. And China clearly does not want to give up market share without a battle. So we may expect China to continue sanction-proofing its economy just in case. And that includes developing their own payment method in the event of currency bans. That also entails purchasing more gold to supplement their stockpiles. China will continue to expand its global presence throughout the world, and investment in Belt Road projects, particularly in Latin America, will not cease. That's a key mission for China. But let's speak about oil for a moment. We now know that China has been buying inexpensive oil from Russia for more than 2 years. This allowed China to save more than $4 billion in 2023 alone. That's a lot of money and a competitive advantage that will enable Chinese industry to rocket ahead. And this is a significant advantage that extends beyond reducing energy costs. Russia and China have completely de-dollarized the commodities trade. This allows China to pay in local currency rather than USD. With sanctions on Russia repealed, there is a risk that Russian oil will flow to the United States. The United States only pays for imports in dollars. Let us not underestimate how much oil China receives from Russia. Putin is China's largest supplier, providing 2.2 million barrels daily. This volume is projected to decrease somewhat in the next few years. To compensate for the shortage, China is expected to increase its nuclear power and solar aspirations. But it's also worth noting that Russia will not forsake China. The previous 3 years have been a wake-up call. Trump is only in office for the next 4 years. And every time the administration changes, it's a massive coin flip. So we shouldn't expect Russia and China to depart from their commitment to a multipolar world. That is the only real protection against the collective West. But let's speak about Europe. What's going on today is just bizarre. As previously stated, the EU's sanctions continue to be in effect. This is more enjoyable than Netflix. While the US wants out, the EU is doubling down. They truly feel they can win without the Americans, which is quite unusual at this stage. Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, has also asked the EU to utilize the frozen Russian assets to provide help to Ukraine. So we may expect Europe to continue the struggle and impose economic sanctions on Russia. We might see $200 billion in Russian assets taken away to support Ukraine and Europe's war industry. It won't be enough, but it is most likely what will happen. So, how will the easing of US sanctions affect the EU? Well, it's simple. We will continue to witness stagnation in EU economies, and deindustrialization will worsen. Economies such as Germany will suffer the most. Since February, energy costs in Germany have been steadily climbing. It's nearly doubled. Power prices in Germany are now 3 times higher than those in the United States or China. And because the Germans have no other options, such as nuclear power, they are locked in industrial decline. The EU will not ease the sanctions on Russian oil and gas, so major industrial economies such as Germany will continue to be penalized. More firms will leave Germany, with more fears of Volkswagen shutdown and manufacturing relocation to China or the United States. And it's unfortunate, because Europe's economic failure is directly related to political blunders. Germany's energy prices exceed those of its major rivals in practically every key area. German steel manufacture is too expensive. The same goes for chemicals, glass, and cars. We don't need a crystal ball for this one. Until the EU resolves this issue, more industries, jobs, and innovation will leave the bloc. In a strange twist, this benefits both the United States and China. Finally, let's talk about the United States. Since Trump's election, the posture toward Russia has eased significantly. Now observe how Rubio's tone differs from when he talks about China.
Well, sanctions are all the result of this conflict. There are sanctions that were imposed as a result of this conflict. And so I would say to you that in order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides. We're not going to predetermine what those are. We're certainly not going to negotiate this today or in a press conference for that matter. But and there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions as well that have been imposed.
And this explains why the US wants to lift sanctions on Russia. Yes, it is all about preventing nuclear war and bringing peace to the globe. However, it extends beyond that. Remember the huge plan? It's about facing China's industrial economy. And to do so, the US requires Russian commodities to enter global markets. Russia is the world's largest natural resource producer. And when you total up all of their commodities, including oil, gas, and rare earths, we have the world's largest stockpile, more than the United States and 3 times that of China. We're talking about at least $75 trillion in resources. Because of the restrictions, many of these are being sold to the Chinese economy at a discount. So easing sanctions would allow Russia to export resources to the United States. Other nations can purchase from Russia without fear of secondary penalties. And as worldwide demand for Russian commodities rises, so does Putin's selling price. As a result, China will lose part of its industry's discounted inputs. More crucially, it gives the United States access to them. We're seeing the US government face a reckoning. They recognize that financial punishments are ineffective. Control over global supply networks is what genuinely matters. Take the Russian price ceiling as an example. The G7 set the price for Russian crude at $60 per barrel. However, after a few months, Russia's oil was selling for far more than $60. Why is that? It is because they control the supply of crude through OPEC while selling to the BRICS nations. Physical reality eliminated financial sanctions that only existed on paper. The United States now realizes this. You can't redirect global supply chains unless you control the majority. BRICS controls the majority. Western sanctions are growing increasingly ineffective. While the EU does not comprehend this, Trump finally does. And that is why sanctions against Russia are now being discussed. Now, will Russia export goods to the United States? Maybe, but we can expect Putin to establish the conditions, and I wouldn't be shocked if Russia seeks more concessions. They rule the battlefield, and penalties are ineffective against them. So the Russians have a distinct edge here. The United States cannot compete with China unless it has access to Russian goods. Let us not forget this. However, there is still one sticking point: the frozen Russian deposits. Russia's central bank said that they were not involved in the discussions to ease the sanctions. They were also unaware that any Russian assets had been unfrozen. $300 billion is a large sum of money, and any government in the world would want it back. The United States possesses around $50 billion. Over 200 billion euros are stalled in Europe's clearing system. So, how will that play out? Can the US force the Europeans to return Russia's money? Because that would be another smack in the face. It would be adding insult to injury, especially when the United States is going to forsake them. But then again, does the EU have any bargaining leverage nowadays? Tariffs in the United States alone have the potential to ruin the economy. As a result, we must keep a close eye on the discussions, since they may not proceed as planned. Some sanctions may now be eased, but it is likely that Russia's assets will be lost forever. And if that's the case, will Putin accept it? But tell me what you think. Will the United States withdraw all sanctions on Russia? And why is the EU still resisting? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to like and subscribe as we navigate these tumultuous times.